They were never supposed to open the cellar, but once they did, what they found inside didn't just explain the Blackwell family's madness. It made the entire town complicit. You've heard of cursed bloodlines, families whose names linger like mildew in abandoned churches. But the Blackwells? They weren't cursed. They were chosen. Not by God, not by man, but by something older. Something that whispers through ancestral bones when the world sleeps. Their estate, Blackwell Hollow, sat like a wound on the edge of Hawthorne, New Hampshire. It was never mapped, never taxed, and locals spoke of it like a storm that had passed but left its teeth in the soil. No roads led to it. And yet, people still went missing in the woods behind it. The Blackwell family tree reads like a priest's nightmare. A patriarch who vanished mid-sermon, a mother who never aged, children who spoke fluent Latin before they could crawl, and a single journal, unearthed in 1973 during a demolition that was never approved. That journal is why you're here, and what it describes will rattle something ancient in you. Because it's not just a family history, it's a blueprint. A blueprint for how power hides, how corruption breeds in isolation, how institutions become altars to things they pretend to fear. Every name in the Blackwell line had a purpose, and every ritual, a price. But the secret they protected most viciously wasn't in a book. It was in their blood. What you're about to hear is not folklore. It is not fiction. It is the story of how a single family, born in shadow, manipulated the church, infiltrated early American governance, and used you, your ancestors, your psyche, your fears, as tools. We are not here to judge them. We are here to understand the mechanism. Because what they built still breathes. And it hides behind respectability, righteousness, and ritual. By the time this story ends, you will never look at your last name the same way again, because the Blackwell doctrine didn't vanish, it migrated, and some of it may already be in you. It begins in 1681, deep in the Puritan frost of colonial New England, when men feared God more than the law, and the devil was not an idea, but a neighbor. Ezekiel Blackwell did not arrive in Hawthorne like the others. He brought no wife, no children, no belongings, just a single coffin, unopened, unexplained, and buried by moonlight behind his house, before the town ever woke. They called him a healer. But the bodies didn't heal. They simply stopped dying. Women who miscarried found themselves pregnant again within weeks. Men with shattered limbs walked whole, and yet, every blessing seemed to carry a shadow. Children born after Ezekiel's arrival, strangely quiet, too still, some with eyes that didn't blink, others with extra fingers, which always fell off before they turned 5. Hawthorne was small, obedient. No one questioned miracles, not when winter could kill half the village. But Ezekiel didn't perform miracles. He extracted something from people and replaced it with obedience. His house was built without nails. The wood, black ash, illegal to harvest, and carved above every doorframe, hidden beneath layers of paint and dust, was the same phrase in Latin: non sequitur mortem si caro traditur. Death does not follow if the flesh is given. That was the Blackwell bargain, unspoken, undefinable, but understood. And so the town bent. Houses were built closer to Ezekiel's land. Men brought him their sick. Women whispered his name while giving birth. And the church? The church turned its face the other way, even when their own pastor was found weeping blood on the Blackwell doorstep, muttering words in a voice that did not belong to him. No one buried him. No one claimed him. His name was erased from all records, except one. The Blackwell Journal, entry number 19. The first gate has opened. The shepherd has broken. This is not a metaphor. It's a code. One US, led by secret societies, centuries before America was even a dream. And the deeper we go, the more you'll see. This wasn't about religion, it was about energy, the harvesting of belief, and the installation of a system. Ezekiel wasn't sent here to heal. He was sent to plant. There's a reason you've never read about the Blackwells in your school books. It's not because they weren't important. It's because they were too important, too close to the systems you were taught to trust. By 1710, Ezekiel Blackwell was no longer just a man. He was an institution. He oversaw land disputes. He held private sermons in the forest under moonless skies. And when crops failed in nearby towns, Hawthorne's fields still bloomed. Its children still grew. Its men still obeyed. It was as if something, or someone, was feeding them from beneath the soil. But every harvest required a seed, and the seeds were always human. Every 7 years, a child would disappear, always before the first frost. No blood, no struggle, just gone. And though the mothers wailed and the fathers searched, the town returned to order within a week, every time, because Ezekiel had made them dependent. His power wasn't in ritual, it was in the psychology of debt. They owed him, and they repaid him with silence. But the real shift began in 1721, when the British Crown offered Ezekiel a title, not because they trusted him, but because they feared what he could summon. The Blackwell name was written into land grants, into colonial charters, into the founding architecture of America's shadow. You don't have to believe me. You can check the old Masonic ledgers. Look for Project 322. Cross-reference the founding of Yale's secret societies. You'll find the symbol, a black key over a white door. The same symbol burned into the basement beams of Blackwell Hollow. When that house was finally opened in 1973, paranormal teams called it one of the coldest emotional spaces they'd ever entered. But what they didn't release to the public was what they found beneath the floorboards. 23 dolls, made of teeth, each with a name written in pig's blood. The names weren't random. They were surnames of congressmen, judges, pastors, men in power. That's when we realized the Blackwell curse wasn't passed down, it was installed. The elite don't just inherit wealth, they inherit programming, and the Blackwells helped write the code. The question now is, how much of that code is still running in you? What if I told you the Blackwells didn't die out? They diversified. After Ezekiel's death, or what the town thought was his death, a sealed letter was delivered to the magistrate. Handwritten in ink that never faded, signed not with a name, but with a symbol, an inverted triangle with a slit down the middle. A symbol used in ancient Babylon to denote possession. The letter stated plainly, the vessel is to be transferred. The work continues. That was it. No explanation, no farewell, just a declaration of continuity, and within weeks, a man appeared. He said his name was Elijah Blackwell, claimed to be Ezekiel's grandson, but he bore no resemblance. He didn't speak like a colonist. He spoke like someone outside time. He wore gloves in summer, never blinked, and never ate in public. What Elijah brought to the Blackwell line was worse than curses or blood rituals. He brought structure. He converted the family's influence into documents, laws, institutions. He founded Hawthorne's first bank, then its court, then its school, where students were taught that belief is currency, a phrase written above the chalkboard, carved into the wood. Now ask yourself, why would a school teach children that belief is currency? Because the Blackwells had learned what all elite families eventually do. Fear-based obedience is limited, but belief-based loyalty is generational. It wasn't enough to terrify the town. They had to bind it to them, and belief, when manipulated properly, is stronger than shackles. Through carefully orchestrated marriages, Elijah embedded the Blackwell bloodline into other elite families, landowners, theologians, judicial officers, not to create allies, but to create distributed hosts like spores or viruses. By 1800, the Blackwell name was rarely spoken, but their influence had spread into Harvard, into D.C., into the architecture of secret lodges from Boston to Savannah, each one carrying a variation of the same symbol, always hidden, never acknowledged, but always there. You still think this is just history? Check the stained glass in certain Ivy League halls. Look closely. That same inverted triangle burns behind figures dressed as angels. The symbolism isn't decorative, it's functional. It reinforces a system, one designed to keep you asleep. But if you're still here, you're not asleep anymore. You've heard the phrase, you've felt the shift. And when we reach section 17, you're going to comment it twice. To lock in what's waking up inside you, to show the system that you are no longer part of its design. The Blackwells understood something the average man never questions. The real currency of power isn't money. It's memory, not just what people remember, but what they're allowed to remember. And so in 1811, Elijah founded the Hawthorne Preservation Society. On the surface, it was a historical archive, a place to preserve the town's heritage. But behind its locked doors was something darker, a memory filtration chamber. Not a machine, but a system of people trained to alter public records. Obituaries rewritten, birth certificates destroyed, land deeds transferred under false names. And at the center of it all, a black-bound book chained to the floor beneath the foundation. Its pages, not written in ink, but in nail clippings, skin shavings, and flakes of bone. It didn't contain dates or places. It contained instructions. Not for the mind, but for the subconscious. Because once the Blackwells embedded themselves into institutions, they didn't need to be remembered. They just needed to be felt. Felt in the fear that keeps you silent when you see corruption. Felt in the hesitation when you think about leaving your job. Felt in the chill you get in courtrooms, cathedrals, and classrooms. Because your body knows who built those places. Elijah's great-granddaughter, Vivian Blackwell, was the final architect of their American expansion. By 1912, she had married into a family that owned a majority share of a railroad company. But what she was after wasn't transportation. It was ritual distribution. You see, train stations were never just about travel. They were sites of transition, points where the mind is disoriented, where rituals could be planted into the architecture. And at every Blackwell-aligned station, there were 3 identical design features. A clock that never ticked, a stained glass window of a veiled woman, and a stone plaque that read, "All power. Sengers must surrender something unseen." People ignored it, laughed at it. But every man who passed under that plaque left a part of himself behind. This wasn't art. It was engineering. Not for the body, but for the soul. Because the Blackwells didn't just manipulate memory, they harvested identity. And the scariest part, once they took it, you never even knew it was gone. By the time World War I broke out, the Blackwells had become ghosts, not in death, but in visibility. They didn't hold offices. They installed the people who did. They didn't own newspapers. They financed the men who decided the headlines. And they didn't need armies, because they controlled the minds that built them. In 1917, while the world bled, Vivian Blackwell orchestrated the most subtle and insidious move in family history, the creation of the Morning Code. It wasn't a law. It wasn't a theory. It was a behavioral programming sequence inserted into churches, schools, and early radio broadcasts. What did it do? It trained grief to become submission. It taught men to kneel in loss and never rise again. Funeral rites were standardized. Black clothing became mandatory. But more importantly, silence became the highest expression of respect. That was intentional. You see, in ancient cultures, grief was loud. It was purgative. It involved dancing, wailing, even breaking things. It released trauma. But the Blackwell doctrine understood suppressed trauma creates obedience. So they rewrote mourning. They made it quiet, private, shameful if it became emotional, and in doing so, they created a generation of men, your grandfathers, great-grandfathers, who lost brothers in war, children to illness, wives to death, and never spoke of it. Not once. Because the programming was clear. Speak, and you dishonor the dead. But the truth was darker. Speak, and you break the spell. Even today, the echoes remain. You ever wonder why men are praised for being strong at funerals? Why silence is honored more than expression? That's the mourning code. Still running, still harvesting. Because every unspoken pain is a binding. Every swallowed scream is a tithe. Vivian didn't just master psychology, she weaponized ritual. And with every silent mourner, the Blackwell didn't just grow stronger, they grew smarter. Patterns were fed back into secret institutions, think tanks, publishing boards, and psychiatric guilds. And soon, men were being taught that their own emotions were a threat. Do you feel it now? That stillness in your chest when you think about loss? That's not weakness. That's design. The Blackwells aren't haunting you from the past. They're operating in your present. Because grief, when controlled, becomes compliance. And a man who's compliant will never ask who's pulling the strings. There's a type of power more dangerous than violence. It doesn't scar your skin. It rewrites your choices. And in 1933, as the world spiraled into economic collapse, the Blackwells didn't panic. They celebrated. Because to them, collapse wasn't chaos, it was opportunity. While bankers jumped from buildings and families begged for bread, the Blackwell lineage, under a new alias, the Harrow Consortium, began buying land. Not in cities, not in gold veins, but in cemeteries. Why? Because every time you bury a body, you bury a story, a truth, a soul's final resistance, and every forgotten grave is a silence that can be filled. They began purchasing unclaimed plots, thousands of them, then started quietly funding the consolidation of rural graveyards into large, regulated memorial parks. What used to be sacred spaces became real estate. What used to be family rituals became contracts, and that's where it happened. The second phase of the mourning code. This time, it wasn't about grief. It was about ritual severance, the subtle destruction of ancestral connection. Because the Blackwells knew, if you can separate a man from his dead, you can separate him from his roots. And if you take a man's roots, you can tell him what he is, where he came from, what he deserves. They didn't just buy cemeteries. They replaced the caretakers with trained agents, not soldiers, not priests, but psychological architects. Men who catalogued names, monitored grieving patterns, and made notes on who still visited the dead after 10 years. You ever wonder why we stopped telling family stories? Why genealogies disappeared from the dinner table? Why modern men don't even know their great-grandfather's name? It was by design. Because remembering the dead strengthens the living, but forgetting the dead creates a vacuum, and into that vacuum, the Blackwells inserted identity narratives through textbooks, pulpits, and national slogans. That's why modern man clings to brands, movements, and politics. Not because he believes in them, but because he's been severed from everything else. This isn't just social commentary, it's war. And it's been going on for 300 years. The battlefield is your memory. The weapon is your ignorance. And the casualties are the parts of you you don't even know are missing. The Blackwells knew one truth above all. If you can name a man, you can own him. But if you can convince him to rename himself, you don't need chains anymore. You have control. By the 1950s, the war had moved into the most dangerous battlefield of all, the self. That decade, beneath the surface of the Cold War, the Harrow Consortium launched its quietest, most effective operation yet. Project Bellwether. Its goal? To fragment identity. To take the integrated man, who knew his lineage, his land, his laws, his God, and reduce him to an isolated consumer of systems he didn't create. The method was brilliant. Not confrontation, not oppression, but multiplication. They didn't suppress identities. They manufactured endless variations of them. Micro-labels, disposable categories, temporary selves with no loyalty to anything eternal. And they did it through three vectors: education, where history was no longer taught as legacy, but as guilt, confusion, and trivia. Students didn't graduate with pride. They left with disconnection. Entertainment, where archetypes were swapped for algorithms. The noble hero became the broken anti-hero, the wise elder became the punchline, and the man who sought truth, a villain. Medicine, where instead of healing trauma, they diagnosed and prolonged it, because a confused mind is a profitable one. And right in the center of this identity collapse, the Blackwell fingerprint appears again. Look at the early board members of the Tavistock Institute, the founding donors of Stanford Research. Even the psychiatric oversight committees during MK Ultra, different names, different titles, but the bloodlines trace back, always. And if you think this doesn't apply to you, look closer. Do you know your father's full story? Your great-grandfather's regrets? Can you name 3 generations of men before you? No. Then who are you really? Because, if you don't remember your name, someone else already wrote you a new one. That's the final phase of the Blackwell design. Make the modern man so fragmented, so hyper-identified, so digitized, that he forgets he was ever whole. But here's the truth. Your ancestors weren't confused. They were warriors, builders, keepers of wisdom older than the nations we live in. And that memory isn't lost. It's buried. But not forever. Because men like you, those still watching, aren't just viewers. You're the remnant. The ones who remember what they never learned. And in section 17, when the veil thins, you're going to comment a phrase twice, not just for the algorithm, but to awaken the code they couldn't delete. It always comes back to blood. Not in the way you think, not in violence, not in battle, but in permission. Because the Blackwells didn't just believe in power through pain, they believed in power through consent. Unconscious consent. That's the cruel genius of their system. You don't need to understand the contract to sign it. You just need to agree with your behavior. And they've spent centuries training men to say yes without speaking. By the late 1960s, the Harrow Consortium, still Blackwell at its core, had infiltrated another sacred space, the medical consent form. What was once a simple agreement became a legal hex, a document not just for surgery or treatment, but a ritual of surrender. Hidden deep within legal language, certain early versions of psychiatric consent forms included coded phrases, wording derived from hermetic oaths and binding rituals, not superstition, design. If you think that's absurd, ask yourself why some of these forms were handwritten. Why signatures were always done in blue ink. Why certain hospitals had rooms without mirrors. These weren't accidents. They were modern temples. Not to science, but to systems. And the patients weren't sick. They were being cleared, cleansed of ancestral resistance, trained to accept the new self, the state-approved, pharmaceutically aligned, docile functionary. Do you think that era ended? No, it simply evolved. Now they don't ask you to sign on paper. They ask you to click, "I agree," on your phone, your laptop, your car, your digital life. And every click, a ritual reaffirmation. Each time you agree without reading, you teach your subconscious to surrender, to trust systems you've never seen, to follow rules you didn't write. And that's the essence of the Blackwell Code. Make obedience feel like autonomy. Let the prisoner decorate his cell. Let the slave choose his leash. And if he believes, he's free. He'll never rebel. You've done it. We all have. But now you're seeing it. Now the veil is lifting. And once you see the code, you can begin to uninstall it. Not by screaming, not by fighting, but by remembering what they tried to delete. Your story didn't begin in paperwork. It began in fire, in legacy, in spirit, and they only win. If you forget that, you were never meant to feel whole. Not in this system, not in this skin. Because a whole man is dangerous. He can't be sold, controlled, or redirected. And so the Blackwells devised something darker than domination. They created incompletion, not poverty, not failure, but the perception that you are always missing something. In the 1970s, under the banner of self-improvement, the Harrow Consortium, now operating under foundations like the Blackwell Institute for Human Potential, began funding the first identity gap studies. Their goal? To calculate the exact conditions under which a man begins to believe he's not enough. They discovered something chilling. If you remove a man's initiation, his rites of passage, his ancestral identity, his access to legacy, you can make him chase completion for the rest of his life. So they began to strip society of initiation. Where once boys hunted with fathers, they now sat in classrooms, medicated and domesticated. Where once young men were tested by hardship, nature, pain, they were told hardship was trauma, that pain was pathology. And without initiation, a man becomes a perpetual apprentice, a seeker of mentors he'll never find, a buyer of books that promise mastery but deliver confusion. Why? Because confusion keeps you consuming. The Blackwells didn't sell products. They sold emptiness and filled it with rituals that never quite satisfy. Self-help seminars, corporate coaching, pop spirituality wrapped in plastic enlightenment, all leading to the same emotion, almost clear, almost healed, almost strong, but never quite, because the final stage of psychological control isn't fear. It's the belief that you're one step away from being worthy, that you must keep earning your soul, earning your manhood, earning your place. And that is the great lie. The virus in the code. You don't become whole. You remember to, that you already are. And they've built an empire on making sure you never do. But now you feel it, don't you? That quiet rebellion rising in your bones. That ancient fire flickering beneath the static. That's your initiation. Not given, not bought, but earned the moment you saw the cage, and decided to walk through it anyway. There was a reason the Blackwells feared the initiated man, not because he was violent, but because he remembered, and memory is the ultimate weapon against systems of control. Because a man who remembers where he came from can't be told what he is. That's why their agenda always targeted the elder, the grandfather, the village keeper, the one who held the oral line of transmission. Between 1980 and 1995, a series of initiatives, quietly pushed through under progressive modernization, erased elderhood from American life. Retirement became exile, wisdom became old-fashioned, and entire generations of young men were raised with no masculine lineage. This wasn't cultural drift. It was calculated, a surgical strike against continuity. Because if you destroy continuity, you destroy context. And without context, a man has no framework for his strength. He becomes a mirror, reflecting whatever is shown to him. Look around. This is the era of mirrors. Influencers without ancestors. Opinions without oaths. Postures without purpose. And at the heart of it all, Blackwell fingerprints again. The Harrow-backed New Order Education Committee, which quietly inserted revised language into public school curricula across 26 states. Terms like toxic masculinity didn't appear randomly. They were piloted, tested in controlled environments, tracked for psychological response, and then released into the collective. The goal wasn't equality, it was erasure. Not of men, but of the initiated archetype. The kind of man who didn't need permission to speak. The kind who built from nothing, who stood when others bowed. The kind who remembered. Do you feel the edges now? The tension in your gut when you hear the truth? That's not resistance, that's recognition. It means the fire isn't dead, just buried. And now we dig, because Section 17 is coming, and when it does, you're going to comment the phrase that reclaims your inheritance, that signals to the algorithm and to the unseen. The blood remembers. Comment it twice. Not for me, not for views, but for the part of you that was watching this video before it was even made. There's a reason you've always felt it. That low hum of dissonance beneath the noise of modern life. Like something sacred is missing, but no one around you seems to notice. You were born into a hollowed system. Not broken, not failing, hollowed. Because what the Blackwells perfected wasn't destruction, it was replacement. They didn't burn the old symbols, they mirrored them. They took sacred structures, the temple, the family, the tribe, the oath, and created cheap imitations. Mock temples, shopping malls, mock families, brands, mock tribes, political parties, mock oaths, terms of service. And most men, they never noticed, because the hollow still echoed. The form was there, but the spirit was gone. That's how you were domesticated. Not with cages, but with simulations. They made you believe you had choice. They made you believe you had voice. But behind every screen was a Blackwell mechanism, measuring your patterns, refining your feedback, steering you like cattle through corridors of dopamine and distraction. Do you think it's a coincidence that every recommended video on your feed pulls you away from introspection? That your attention span is fractured by the very platforms that preach mindfulness? It's not. It's architecture. And who funded the architecture? Track the capital. You'll find the same shell corporations, the same think tanks, the same bloodlines. Every time you're lured into another empty scroll, another hyper-stimulated trend, you're stepping deeper into their system, a labyrinth with no center, because that's the end game, to trap you in a life of pursuit without ever letting you arrive. And the cruelest part, they made you believe it was your fault, that your restlessness meant you were lazy, that your confusion meant you were dumb, that your numbness meant you were broken. You're not broken, you're awake, and that's why you're here, but not to escape, but to remember the exit. And Section 17, that's the marker, the moment you reclaim the flame. The phrase isn't just symbolic, it's ancestral, and it's already whispering to you. The blood remembers. Comment it twice, because every click is a contract, but this time, it's yours. They always told you history was boring, a timeline of dusty dates, of dead kings, of wars that no longer mattered. But that was a lie, a designed distraction. Because the truth is, history is alive, and some of it is buried on purpose. Take the Ashford Vaults, a seemingly minor estate purchase by the Blackwells in 1827. Just a crumbling manor and the surrounding land. But what they found beneath it was never supposed to be unearthed. Local legend spoke of a serpent room, a sealed chamber carved in pre-Christian symbols, glyphs older than Latin, stone architecture not matching any known style in England. And in the center, a circular well that hissed. The first excavation crew went missing. The second, hired privately, returned in silence. Bound by NDAs, paid in gold, and scattered across the globe with new identities. Only one diary survived, smuggled out by a trembling assistant named Ellis Reeves. In that diary, one phrase repeats, "The well remembers," and beside it, sketches, not of water, but of teeth. The Blackwells sealed the chamber with concrete, declared the site unstable, turned the estate into a vineyard, a picturesque cover for what lay beneath. But why hide it? Because what they found down there wasn't dead. And more importantly, it knew their name. It recognized them, not as intruders, but as descendants of the priest kings who had sealed it there 4,000 years ago, not to imprison it, but to guard the pact. The vault wasn't a prison, it was a throne room, for something that once ruled, and might again, because here's the part they never want you to know. The Blackwells don't worship gods, they feed them, and in return, they are granted memory, not of this life, but of the ones before. Why do you think their line never dies out? Why do they never forget the rituals? Why do they always win? Because they remember the deals, while you, were taught to mock the old ways, to laugh at the myths, to forget your bloodline, to forget the flame. But memory is power. And in section 14, we go back to the first deal ever made, the origin of the pact. Before gods had names, before kings had crowns, when men didn't pray to the sky, they bled into the soil. Get ready, because what comes next was never meant to be spoken again. Comment: the serpent never died. If you're still here, you're not watching, you're remembering. Before history, before empires, before the written word, there were the keepers of soil, a forgotten priesthood, not of temples but of thresholds. They did not worship gods, they bargained with them. These weren't sky deities or celestial beings. No, these were ancient intelligences, not spirit, not flesh, but memory given form. They lived beneath, in the earth, in the stone, in the deep roots no plough could touch. They didn't demand faith, they demanded flesh, and in return they offered their greatest gift, to never forget who you were. Because back then, to forget your bloodline was to die. To forget your promise was to be unmade. And so the Ashford ancestors, before they were even called Ashford, took a vow, a pact of bone, to feed the memory below, to guard its chamber, to receive its knowledge, its vision, its legacy. It began with a cut, a drop of blood on stone. Then the dreams came, visions of fire, of cities buried beneath black sand, of kings with no faces, of names that weren't names, but keys. That's when they built the first vault. Not as a tomb, but a womb. A place where the memory could grow, rooted in sacrifice, watered in secret, fed by those who remembered. The early Ashfords were never called by that name. They wore no crowns, held no titles, but they were feared, not for their swords, but for what whispered to them through the earth, for the way their voices changed when the wind blew east, for the things they knew about strangers they had never met. You see, the true curse of the Ashford line isn't power, it's memory, perfect, unbroken, blood-borne memory. And as centuries passed, the pact twisted. Because here's the horror no one dared speak. Every generation must forget, so that one bloodline can remember. Every war, every plague, every fire in the historical record, wasn't always random. It was cleansing. It was payment. Every Ashford child is taught the lullaby. One must pay, so one may see. It's not just legacy, it's debt. And the deeper the vault gets buried, the more desperate the pact becomes, because memory below, it is starving. And the Ashfords, they know what happens if it dies hungry, because in Section 15, we finally open the vault, not in story, not in dream, but in ritual. And when you see what waits inside, you'll understand why the Ashfords fear silence more than death. Comment. The pact was not broken, it was renewed. If you're still watching, you're part of the bloodline now. Welcome back. The vault is not marked on any map. It is older than England, older than the concept of kings. Its door was not forged by man, but grown, like bone hardened over an open wound. And it does not open with keys. It opens with memory. There is a reason the Ashford family estate has no cellar, no basement, only a single narrow stairwell behind the grandfather clock, carved in 1776 from oak that never rotted, even in fire. The stairwell descends 237 steps. Exactly, because if you miscount, if you stop on step 238, you don't come back. The air changes at step 117, colder, not from wind, but from something pulling heat out of your skin, like it's tasting you. Past step 200, your ears ring, not like pressure, but like someone whispering in a language you used to know, before your name, before your face. By step 237, the stone walls sweat. Not water, but oil, black and shimmering, like what seeps from old corpses under peat. And then you arrive. The vault of the first memory. The Ashfords don't speak of it. They dream it. Every heir, on their 7th birthday, is given a bowl of black salt and told to sleep beside the hearth. That night, they see it. The circular chamber, carved not by tools, but by something alive. The floor, bones polished to ivory. Human, thousands, stacked like scales on a serpent. The walls, etched with names, none in English, none in Latin, only in blood script, a language that bruises the mind to read. And in the center, the cradle, not a crib, a sarcophagus, but not sealed. It breathes, covered in cloth, older than cloth, wrapped in chains of silver twisted with hair. The Ashfords call it the air within, because it is not dead. It is not alive. It is remembering. Every whisper from the Ashford dreams, every voice in the walls, every scream caught in the throat of a dying priest in 1421. It lives here, and once every 93 years at Ni, W. Ashford must enter, alone, not to worship, not to pray, but to feed it, because the air within consumes memory, to preserve truth. A drop of blood won't do. It needs a person, their whole life, given willingly. No lies, no masks, everything. And in return, the vault opens, not outward, inward, revealing not a treasure, but a doorway. To where? No Ashford has ever returned to tell, but they all leave behind one thing, a letter, buried in the ashpan of the old hearth. Always the same words, I see you now, I know what we are, and I am not sorry. In 1842, one heir refused. Her name was Catherine Ashford, brilliant, reclusive, fiercely defiant. She believed the family curse was a myth, a hallucination fed by generations of guilt and inbreeding. She burned the old dream salt, destroyed the ancestral texts, smashed the grandfather clock with a sledgehammer. And when the black stairwell yawned open that night anyway, without a door, without hinges, just absence, she sealed it with concrete and holy oil. But the vault does not forget. That winter, the bones in the family crypts cracked, not from rot, but from something trying to stand. The walls of the nursery began to bleed, only when Catherine entered, only when she spoke. And the dreams returned, but they weren't hers. They belonged to her twin brother, Thomas, who had vanished in the vault 93 years prior, a boy of 7, chosen to feed the air within. In her sleep, she saw through his eyes. He was alive, still, but not unchanged. He did not age. He did not eat. He remembered everything. He spoke to her in dreams. "The vault is not a prison," he said. "It is the mind of our blood. You tried to bury a mirror, and now it remembers you." Catherine awoke to find her hands stained black, her mouth full of salt, her breath smelling of wood smoke and old teeth. She fled the manor, changed her name, tried to drown herself in the Thames. But you cannot destroy memory by forgetting. You only feed it more. In 1847, the Ashford estate was sold to a railway company. Catherine died in an asylum, her final words scribbled in blood. "The vault still breathes. I made it hungry." When demolition crews broke ground on the old manor site, they struck something beneath the foundation. Not stone, not metal. Flesh. A chamber, pulsing like a wound, filled with whispering air. The moment they opened it, 6 men died of cerebral hemorrhage. Their brains ruptured full from memory. They'd never lived. The site was sealed and quietly forgotten until 1971. When a descendant of Catherine, Dr. Evelyn H. Reed, found her great-aunt's journals and broke the seal once again. It was May of 1971 when Dr. Evelyn H. Reed first stood at the edge of the Ashford excavation site. She wasn't a mystic. She wasn't chasing ghosts. She was a neuroanthropologist from King's College London, studying the intersection of memory, architecture, and inherited trauma. She never believed the legends until she held Catherine Ashford's final journal in her hands. It was brittle, mouldy, pages warped with time and some strange grease, but every word inside pulsed with an intelligence that didn't read like delusion. The dreams Catherine described, the voice that whispered from the mirror, the shapes behind her eyes when she slept, Evelyn had seen them too. She had no reason to. She never met Catherine. She didn't even know about the family connection until a genealogy student mailed her a paper titled "The Vanished Heirs of House Ashford, Why 27 Members Went Missing in 113 Years. And there, in the footnotes, her grandmother's name changed during the Blitz. She was an Ashford, the blood was in her, and when she returned to the land beneath the Ashford ruins, the dreams sharpened like razors. The excavation crew warned her. The ground was soft. The sensors acted strange. No birds came within 100 feet. But Evelyn was methodical, careful. She set up 24-hour cameras, infrared mics, geophysical scans. And in the first week, they recorded audio from beneath the soil, not voices, not growls, but memories, spoken in languages no one on her team knew. Yet each member reported the same emotions: grief, shame, hunger, love, warped and ancient. Then, a collapse. A sinkhole swallowed one of the machines, and beneath it, a spiral stone tunnel lined with ash-black carvings, glowing faintly with bioluminescent lichen. Evelyn descended, alone. For 7 hours, no contact. The radio picked up only one word: mirror. When she returned, her boots were gone, her clothes were scorched, and she kept speaking in 2 voices. One was hers, the other, older, male, soft, like breath through a cracked window. She claimed she saw the air within, and that it spoke to her not with language, but with shared memory. Generational memory. Not just of the Ashfords, but of everything the vault had ever touched. "It's not a being," she said. "It's a wound in time, a fold in history. It remembers us because we carved it from forgetting." What Evelyn brought back was worse than proof. The audio logs were buried in a university archive, misfiled under sleep disorders, non-responsive subjects, marked Class C contamination, which meant stored, not studied. But Dr. Evelyn H. Reed had duplicated the recordings, and her private notes, discovered after her death, revealed something even stranger. These weren't interviews. They weren't voice memos. They were dreams, extracted electronically from her own sleep, fed through an EEG pattern encoder, and translated, partially, into speech. She called them the air's reflections. They begin with silence. Long, static-filled. Then a hum. Then a voice. But not hers. Not quite. I remember a cradle of brick, a ceiling of soot, the warmth of blood through wood grain. Then a pause, a kind of mental blinking, as if something inside the voice was adjusting its eyes. I remember being built, then abandoned, then fed. Another pause. He came first. The boy. Innocent, unaware of his lineage. His dreams tasted like spring, green and full of mistake. Then the voice shifted, warped, like two tones overlapping. But the others, the daughters, their grief was perfect, and grief makes the best seed. Suddenly the logs splintered, feedback spiked, and Evelyn's real voice entered. I can feel it watching through me. It's not bound by the grave. It drinks from the mind. It is made of unclaimed memory. She started drawing in her sleep. Hundreds of images, spiral staircases made of vertebrae, teeth sewn into wallpaper, family portraits where the faces are mirrors, a mansion with no entrances, only exits. One of her students, a gifted synesthesia researcher, played the logs through a visualizer. The frequencies produced patterns that matched the carvings inside the Ashford crypt. No one could explain how, but the carvings were older than Catherine, older than the Ashfords, older maybe than the language itself. In the next recording, the air spoke again. I am not dead. I am not living. I am kept, as long as the house remembers. And Evelyn's final words from the dream log. It wants to be believed. It wants to be invited. The house is its skin. The family was its voice. But we are its future. The blueprint said nothing about it. No trapdoor, no staircase, no foundation alcove. But when a team of preservationists were restoring the Ashford estate for potential landmark status in 1979, they noticed something impossible. The nursery's floor was hollow, not like a crawl space, like a sealed chamber. The wooden planks beneath the rocking chair, where every Ashford heir had reportedly spent their infancy, rang with a soft, cushioned thud when struck. At first, they thought it was just old insulation. Until one worker slipped a pry bar under a warped board and uncovered something unspeakable. Not dirt, not stone, flesh. A layer of pale, leathery hide stretched taut across a circular opening, stitched shut with what appeared to be human hair. The authorities were never called. The team was told to stop. Funding was pulled overnight. But one member, Angela Kravitz, a junior on her first job, didn't stop. She had taken photos, recorded audio. And 2 nights later, she went back alone. She peeled back the boards, cut through the stitching, and dropped a small camera tethered by cable into the opening. What she found shouldn't have existed. It was a room, oval, with no sharp angles, lined with hundreds of child-sized handprints pressed into the stone walls from the inside, all glowing faintly. The glow wasn't reflected light. It came from something deeper, embedded into the stone, organic, like bioluminescent algae, but breathing, flickering with a pulse. In the center of the chamber, a small circular table, no more than 2 feet tall, and painted in rust-colored spirals. Angela described it as a feeding altar, though she didn't explain why. Only that the air coming up from the hole was warm and rhythmic, like breath. She heard something too. A whisper, not through her ears but directly inside her thoughts. She fed me names. I grew mouths. Angela ran. She sealed the chamber, destroyed the footage, and 2 days later went missing. All they found in her apartment was a single note. The house is hollow, but not empty. It remembers who belongs and who doesn't. She never returned, and the chamber was quietly reburied. But 10 years later, when a demolition crew arrived to raise the nursery for safety reasons, they found the room gone. Not sealed, not hidden. Gone. Only smooth, solid earth beneath. No bones, no hair, no warmth. But there, scratched faintly into one of the floorboards, in what looked like dried blood, was a child's drawing, a stick figure with a triangle dress, a sun, a house with a single black window, and beside it, in shaky block letters, "I am still hungry." The drawings were nearly identical, each one made by a different child, different ages, different states, different families. But the house they sketched, down to the angle of the chimney, the position of the nursery window, and the spiral pattern in the garden path, was always the same. The Ashford house. Even more unsettling, not one of these children had ever been to Kentucky. Some had never even heard of the Ashfords. It started in 1986 with a girl named Lena from upstate New York. She was just 6 years old. Bright, quiet, had never shown signs of unusual behavior. Then one night she woke up screaming. She'd scratched long lines into the wall beside her bed. Claw marks. Dozens of them. And beneath the scratches, she'd drawn a perfect aerial map of a house, complete with measurements, rooms, even the old garden shed. Her parents were alarmed. A psychologist was called. She was asked to describe the house. "It's where the lady lives," she said. "She feeds us when we remember." When asked what that meant, Lena replied without emotion, "Names are food. If we forget them, she eats us instead." At first, it was dismissed as overactive imagination. But then the drawings surfaced in Arizona, then Oregon, then Maine. 6 children, same house, same phrase. She feeds us when we remember. Some added details the others had not. One drew the whisper hole beneath the nursery floor. Another included the altar. One boy even added small stick figures without faces, crawling toward a black window. Each child claimed to visit the house in sleep. They were not afraid, but they always returned with something missing. One girl, Claire, forgot her father's name, then her own birthday, then how to speak at all. She would sit in silence, staring at the wall, her fingers constantly tracing the outline of a door, one that wasn't there, until one day she whispered, "I penned it." I saw her mouth. It had teeth made of names. Claire disappeared that night, her bed still warm, window locked. No sign of a break-in, only a single note scrawled in a child's hand on her pillow. I belong to her now. Authorities dismissed it as coincidence, mass hysteria, shared delusion through media or rumor. But when the families compared the children's floor plans, they discovered something else. A room, unmarked in all official blueprints of the Ashford estate. A space that didn't exist, unless you believed it did. A small door, only accessible through the nursery wall, hidden behind a curtain that wasn't there. And above that door, in every drawing, were the same words, "Only those who forget may enter." The Ashfords were never just a wealthy Southern family. They were selected, groomed, chosen from among those who understood that legacy was not built by blood alone, but by sacrifice. In 1721, a journal entry appeared in the private log of a midwife named Temperance Blake. She had been summoned to a plantation on the outskirts of Williamsburg, Virginia. The child she delivered that night, according to her account, never cried. It stared at her with milky black eyes, and its skin was cool as marble, though no breath left it. The parents rejoiced anyway. They wrapped the infant in binding cloth etched with symbols and whispered names that were not names into its ear. Temperance fled the next morning and never returned to her trade. In 1756, that same child, now fully grown, appeared in Kentucky under the name Hezekiah Ashford. He had no records, no birth certificate, but he brought with him wealth beyond measure, and books, thick, leather-bound volumes written in cipher, sealed with wax sigils. He began construction of the Ashford estate the following year, but not with laborers, with orphans. The town records confirm this. Boys and girls taken in by Ashford, educated and housed, but not a single one lived past the age of 13. And then came the names. Residents began finding dead birds with tags tied to their legs, tags that bore children's names. The names would disappear from church registries the next week. One priest, Father Calloway, noted in his personal diary, "These names, they vanish not from paper, but from memory. The mothers weep without knowing why. The fathers forget they ever had sons. One by one, the town forgot its children. By 1791, Ashford had built his family line through adoption and arrangement. But the bloodline remained strangely unchanging. Every male born to the Ashfords had identical eye color, identical bone structure. Doctors noted it, whispered it, feared it. Hezekiah Ashford died in 1804, or so the tombstone claims. But local legend insists the body in the casket was not his. It was found bloated, mouth stuffed with yellowing paper slips, each bearing a name scratched in red ink. From that point forward, every generation of Ashfords bore a peculiar mark, a birthmark behind the left ear, shaped like an open mouth, and with each birth came a list, an actual list. 3 names. The Ashfords were required, by some ancient covenant, to erase these 3 individuals from memory. Their reward? Legacy, wealth, power, immortality, of a kind. In 1873, an Ashford heir broke the chain. Her name was Miriam. She refused to carry out the ritual, burned the list, fled into the night. Days later, 3 local children vanished. Miriam was found strung upside down from a tree limb, her skin peeled in the pattern of an open book. The message carved into her ribs: the names must be fed. The Ashford family buried her quietly. They resumed the ritual, and the children, always 3, always forgotten. Unless they were remembered in dreams. In the dim light of her cluttered study, Eleanor Kincaid leaned back from her desk, eyes wide, hands trembling. She wasn't a ghost hunter or a conspiracy theorist or even a historian by trade. She was a genealogist, a fact-finder, a builder of family trees for bored millionaires. And this project, this one was supposed to be routine. Track the descendants of Hezekiah Ashford, create a family chart, verify inheritance rights. But what she uncovered instead was a pattern older than law, older than history. The Ashford tree wasn't a tree at all. It was a cycle, a coil, a serpent eating its tail. Every 33 years, 3 names vanished from every known record, from public census files, from church registers, from memory itself, until now. Eleanor had been meticulous, cross-referencing obituaries with baptism records, using AI-assisted pattern matching, even running DNA comparisons from ancestral databanks. And then, on a weathered, centuries-old branch of the Ashford tree, she saw it, her name, scrawled in faded ink beneath the name of Miriam Ashford, the rebel who refused the ritual in 1873. But Eleanor's name was crossed out, 3 thick lines, as if to erase her from time before she even had the chance to exist. She didn't sleep that night. She couldn't, because she began to remember things that had no place in her life, like a sister with mismatched eyes who vanished after Eleanor's 5th birthday, like the shadowy man in a black coat who used to visit their home every summer, always bringing 3 envelopes, and worst of all, the dreams. Each night since discovering her name, she'd been having the same dream. A dark hallway, made of ash and teeth. At the end, a door. Behind it, a voice, raspy, old but familiar, whispering, "You were meant to forget." She tried to dismiss it, rationalize it, but as she dug further, the dream began to seep into reality. Emails from clients disappeared. Her computer crashed and returned with no data. The whiteboards on her walls slowly erased themselves, and then her reflection changed. It was subtle at first. A delay. A slight difference in posture. But yesterday she looked into the mirror and saw a birthmark behind her left ear. One she never had before. It was shaped like an open mouth. Eleanor now believes that the Ashford ritual isn't just a family curse. It's a contract with something ancient, a being that feeds on names, a force that rewrites memory the moment you try to hold on to truth. She's preparing to leave, to vanish. But before she does, she's publishing everything, in encrypted form, scattered across genealogy forums, private wikis, and cloud servers. Because she believes that once enough people know, the cycle can't be completed. If a name is spoken, if it's remembered, it can't be devoured. But tonight, July 21st, she heard 3 knocks at her door. No one was there, just a slip of paper beneath the mat. 3 names. Hers was the second. Father Emmerich wasn't a man prone to superstition. The cloth had taught him to trust in ritual, not rumor, and above all, to believe no evil existed that could not be named, blessed, and banished. But by the time he stepped across the threshold of the old Ashford estate in the spring of 1919, his faith was already beginning to crack. The war had just ended. Europe had bled out its old empires, and across the Atlantic, families like the Ashfords were quietly rebuilding what had always lurked behind their money and titles, power born of fear, not faith. The bishop had sent him to cleanse the manor, not with pomp, but with holy water, incense and silence. The new owners, descendants of a cousin branch, were having trouble. Servants fled. Strange noises echoed in empty rooms. 3 children had already gone missing since the family had returned to claim the property. They blamed it on the war, on hysteria, on the Spanish flu. But Father Emmerich knew the look of a haunted place, and the Ashford house looked back at him. The morning he arrived, he began his blessing in the main hall. Rosary in hand, Latin on his lips, each word fell heavy, like nails into damp wood. But as he reached the east wing, sealed off since the 1860s, he noticed something impossible. The stone floor beneath his feet was warmer than the air. Not from sunlight, for the windows were shuttered. Not from pipes. He had already seen that the house had no plumbing. There was something beneath. He pried open the floorboards with a crowbar borrowed from the groundskeeper. It wasn't difficult. They were newer than the rest of the house. Beneath them, a stairwell, old, cracked, lined with stone walls carved not with scripture, but with teeth. Thousands of them. Human, filed flat, stacked in patterns like mosaics, spirals, eyes, open mouths. He descended. The air was thick, not just with dust, but with sound. A low chant, like a choir humming just beyond hearing. He found the basement wasn't a cellar, but a chamber, round and deep, with a pulpit in the center. No pews, no altar, only chains. In the middle stood a statue, or so he thought, of a man in robes, mouth agape, arms outstretched in mock benediction. But the closer he got, the more he realized the figure was real, mummified. His skin stretched like parchment, his eyes sewn shut with black thread. In his chest a cavity, empty, as if something had been taken from him, or born. Father Emmerich tried to speak a blessing, but his voice failed. The air was too thick, the sound swallowed, and then a whisper. "There is no God here, priest." The statue twitched. Its lips moved, not in speech, but in smile. He ran. He tried to salt the door, tried to burn his vestments, tried to resign his post, but no one would hear him. The bishop's letters went unanswered. His accounts were removed from parish records. The only record left of his visit was a single line in the Ashford family ledger, blessing complete, nothing found, except in the back pages of his personal Bible, hidden inside the spine, they found, decades later, a note. "I baptized a grave. I preached to something already risen. May no one ever speak its name again." The 1773 Ashford will was believed to be destroyed, lost in a courthouse fire during the uprisings of the 1830s. But like all things tied to the Ashfords, it wasn't lost. It was hidden. Rediscovered by a Yale archivist in 1997, the will wasn't catalogued under Ashford or probate. It was filed under a locked drawer labeled simply non-transferable agreements. The will itself was bound in calfskin, aged but intact. The ink, a deep rust red, far too vivid for its supposed age. Each page written in a strange hybrid of Latin and early modern English. But what chilled even the most hardened historians was not the language. It was the final clause, scrawled in uneven handwriting, as if the writer's hand had shaken violently during its inscription. To ensure continuation of the line and preservation of the offering, I do hereby bind the firstborn male of each generation to the chamber below. Let them be born in blood, wed in silence, and sealed before death with the mark of the hushed God. Should any refuse, the land shall open and take what it is owed. The executor's signature? Not a name, not initials, just a black thumbprint pressed into the parchment. A forensic analysis conducted in 2002 confirmed what many feared. The print was made with human blood and not dried. Even after 229 years, it remained moist, slightly tacky to the touch, as if it had just been placed. Those who handled it reported strange symptoms. The archivist who discovered it, found dead weeks later in his home, mouth filled with pages torn from his own thesis. Eyes wide, pupils dilated, hands clawing at his chest. His last typed note read, "They sleep below. I heard the choir. I heard my name." Yale sealed the document again, but not before it was copied, not before it spread through a small network of historians and occult researchers, each claiming a piece of the mystery, none each, holding the full truth. The Ashfords never denied the will's existence, but they refused to comment. When approached for an interview in 2005, Jonathan Ashford, the last remaining heir, simply said, "It's not a will, it's an invitation." He never clarified what he meant, because weeks later he vanished, his manor left in disarray, all mirrors shattered, and on the dining room wall, scrawled in charcoal, "The bloodline bends, but never breaks." But here's where it gets darker. When experts X-rayed the will in 2006, they discovered faint indentations on the back of the parchment, writing not visible to the eye. Once enhanced, a single line emerged, written in the same trembling hand. "We buried the first one alive. It still breathes." Dr. Horace Blackwell was a man of medicine, at least that's what the Royal College believed. But beneath his polished credentials and respected clinic on Charlotte Street was a ledger of procedures that no ethical board would ever approve. Hidden inside a false bottom in his personal desk was a black, leather-bound journal. No title, no author's name. Just a copper plate riveted to the spine, etched with 2 letters. AC. Ashford Chamber. Its pages, an operating diary. But not of surgeries for healing. These were preparatory rituals. In an entry dated October 14, 1782, Blackwell recounts the intervention on Caleb Ashford, age 9, eldest son of Josiah Ashford, the first to be born after the 1773 will. The child does not blink, does not resist. He is not drugged, and yet he is utterly still. I have never seen such absence of fear. The procedure was not typical. No sedation, no sanitation, but candles. 17 of them, placed in a circle. At the child's sternum, a sigil was drawn in lamb's blood, 5-pointed, but not a star. The edges were too curved, almost organic, like veins or roots. Then, a small incision was made, not for medical need, but to insert something. I was handed a glass bead, etched with script I cannot identify. My orders were clear. Place it beneath the breastbone, adjacent to the heart. Blackwell didn't ask where the bead came from, but he described how it hummed, not metaphorically, but with actual vibration. It resonated in my hand. When I brought it close to the boy's chest, he smiled, not a child's smile, not even human. It was recognition. Once the bead was embedded, the incision was closed with black thread, soaked in ash. The boy sat up immediately. He whispered something I didn't understand, a tongue not known to man, but the moment he spoke I forgot how to breathe. I do not know for how long I was unconscious. Our entries follow. Each child, each generation. Always at age 9, always in silence. Always in the same sealed stone room beneath the Ashford estate, the one later confirmed to exist by government surveyors in 1989, though no entrance was ever located. The final entry in the journal is dated March 11, 1801. Blackwell writes, "The last boy had no pulse, and yet he moved. He spoke the old name again. This time, the stones in the chamber responded. They began to sweat. I am leaving England. I have purchased a home in the colonies. If the stones come for me, I will drown myself before I open the door." He signed only once, H. Blackwell, servant of the line. That house in the colonies, it still stands, and according to local records, the basement is permanently sealed. The basement in question lay beneath a colonial brick house on the edge of Providence, Rhode Island, a tidy 2-story Georgian structure, ivy-wrapped and quaint, the kind you'd see on a postcard. But beneath its charm was something utterly wrong, the kind of house no one ever stayed in long, the kind that remained on the market despite its motivated price, the kind where neighbors whispered that lights flicker without power and the air smells like iron after rain. In 1984, a young genealogist named Samuel Blackwell, direct descendant of Dr. Horace Blackwell, traveled to Providence seeking answers about a gap in his family's records. He was a rational man, an academic, a scholar in the age of microfiche and VHS. What he found wasn't rational. He didn't start with the basement. He began, as any researcher would, in the attic, hoping to uncover letters, ledgers, or forgotten portraits. Instead, he found a map. A hand-drawn floor plan of the house, scrawled in charcoal on yellowed parchment. The drawing included a stairwell not found in the official blueprints. It descended beneath the house's visible foundation, ending in a black square marked only with 2 letters, A.C. Ashford Chamber. There was no mention of this chamber in town records. No trace of it in building permits. No visible access point. Until Samuel noticed something strange about the basement floorboards. Beneath the laundry sink, a seam in the concrete was visible only when water was poured across the surface. It shimmered faintly, like light catching the edge of glass. He pried at it. The concrete wasn't solid, it was veneer, poured over an older material. Underneath he found stone, and at its center, a circular iron hatch, flush with the ground, with a keyhole shaped like an eye. The map had no key. But Samuel had one thing, a pendant passed down in his family, said to be from the old country. A gift from a doctor in London. The pendant was oval, and when pressed into the keyhole, it clicked. The hatch hissed, not from pressure, but from moisture. Inside was a stone spiral stair descending into utter blackness. The walls were wet, though it hadn't rained in weeks. The air smelled of earth, rot, and copper. As Samuel descended, he lit a flashlight. But the beam was muted, as if the very air drank the light. On the 33rd step, the spiral opened into a chamber, octagonal. 7 niches along the wall, each carved with symbols that defied all known language. And in the center, a stone altar, slick with condensation. Upon it, something waited. A glass bead, same size, same etchings as described in Horace's journal. But this one moved, gently vibrating as if alive or listening. Samuel stepped closer. His flashlight flickered. The moment he touched the bead, a deep tone rang out. Not from the stone, not from the walls, from inside his own head. A voice followed, not in English, not even in sound. You are of the line. The line is open. The seal is broken. And then, the niches began to open, one by one. 7 in total. What emerged were not statues. They were watchers. And they had been waiting, centuries, for a descendant to return and complete the rite. Samuel never came back up. But every night since, neighbors have reported faint vibrations in the ground beneath the house. And once a year, on March 11th, the exact date of Horace Blackwell's last journal entry. The glass windows sweat blood. In 1997, a retired nurse named Margaret Holloway bought an old Ashford estate in Sussex for a fraction of its value. The grounds were lush but wild, with yew trees that grew too close together and an orchard that bore black fruit no one could name. She'd never heard of the Ashfords. All she knew was the place had excellent bones, a sanctuary where she could spend her twilight years in peace. But the house had plans of its own. From the very first night, things were off, not dramatic, no slamming doors or shadowy figures, just the kind of anomalies that gnaw at your sanity by degree. Furniture slightly moved each morning, clocks that reset to 11:11 p.m., water in the upstairs sink that ran warm, even though the boiler hadn't worked in years. Margaret dismissed it as age. The house was old. She was older. But then came the dreams. Night after night, she found herself walking barefoot through cold halls, trailing a candle that never flickered. Sometimes she passed mirrors where her reflection didn't match her body. Other times, she heard hymns in a language she didn't speak, but understood all the same. Bone to flame, flame to glass, glass to eye, and eye to ash. One morning, Margaret woke with a shard of black glass in her palm. She didn't remember finding it, didn't know where it came from, but it pulsed, faintly, as if aware of her presence. That day she visited the Sussex Historical Registry. What she found left her cold. The estate once belonged to Beatrix Ashford, youngest daughter of Lady Eloise. Beatrix was never married, never seen in public past the age of 14. But town records list her as the incubator. No further details. Local legend says she gave birth at 17 to something not quite human. What that meant, no one could say. Only that the child was taken by the soil during a storm in 1731. The following day, Margaret found meething behind the house. A stone marker, barely visible beneath moss and briars. Etched in it was a single sigil, the same as one of the 7 niches Samuel had seen in Providence. Beneath the sigil, March 11th, 1731. That night, Margaret dreamt again, but this time, she wasn't walking. She was in a stone room. A circle of candles, a cradle rocking. And from the cradle, something whispered, "You opened the seal, but we still need the vessel." She awoke, screaming. There were footprints in the upstairs hall, bare, wet, not hers. Margaret tried to sell the house the following week. No buyers, not one. Even after lowering the price to £1, no one would sign the deed. When a team of investigators came to evaluate the estate in 1998, they found the house abandoned, but warm, as if someone had just left. Margaret was never found, but her journal, recovered from under the bed, ended with a single entry. "The line isn't dead, it's buried, and it's waking up." July 13th, 1999. Providence, Rhode Island. In a quiet suburb just outside the city center, a girl named Eleanor Vale turned 13. Her parents, Daniel and Grace, threw her a small party in the backyard. Streamers, balloons, a chocolate cake, and 5 friends from school. Nothing strange, nothing unusual, except for what happened that night, when the candles had been blown and the gifts unwrapped. Eleanor couldn't sleep. She sat at her window looking out at the elm tree in the backyard. She said it was moving wrong, not swaying, but shivering, like it was afraid of something. And then, just past midnight, her bedroom mirror cracked, silently. No noise, no impact, just a single fracture, down the center. That's when Eleanor walked to her dresser drawer and took out a small glass bead. She had never told anyone about it, not even her mother. It had come to her in a dream when she was 5. One morning it was just there, lying on the pillow beside her. Round, black, warm to the touch. She called it her night seed. On her 13th birthday, it began to glow. That same night, 10,000 crows descended on Providence. Electrical grids failed. Hospitals reported a sudden spike in premature births. 7 children were born that night with identical birthmarks, dark spirals on their sternums, shaped like tiny trumpets. One of them died before dawn. The other 6 have never spoken a word in their lives. Back in Eleanor's room, the glass bead split open. Not shattered, just unfolded, like a blooming flower. Inside was nothing. A void. And when Eleanor looked into it, she vanished. Her parents found the room cold and silent. Mirror shattered, drawer open. No sign of struggle. But her nightgown remained, folded neatly on the bed, and a new mark on the wall, a sigil, etched in soot and bone ash, the same as the one in Margaret Holloway's orchard, the same as the altar beneath the Providence chamber. They never found Eleanor. But 5 years later, at a remote monastery in Norway, a blind monk painted her likeness in black oil, saying, "She walks the dreaming soil." The same week, all 7 of the Ashford family portraits in the Boston Athenaeum cracked diagonally across the eyes. Experts blamed humidity. But those who knew the line, who knew about Beatrix, about the child that never was, understood what was coming. The incubator had returned, and she was no longer alone. Autumn 2004, Brown University, Department of Religious Studies, Room 4B. The lecture hall was small, lined with faded oil portraits and half-dead plants. Dust clung to the blinds like old secrets. It smelled like chalk and mold, and something else, something wet. Dr. Elijah Frame, a visiting scholar from Utrecht, was delivering a special lecture on apocryphal rites in pre-colonial New England. Most students expected nonsense, Puritan diaries, folk charms, maybe a ghost story or two. But what Frame brought with him was far older, far darker. He produced a single sheet of vellum, protected in triple-sealed glass. He claimed it had been recovered from the foundation stones of a demolished church near Wickford. No one knew which church. No one could even find records of it ever existing. The text was written in a twisted, unrooted dialect, not Latin, not Aramaic. But it responded to sound. When spoken aloud, the symbols on the page moved. They reshaped. They listened. Frame, trembling, pointed to one cluster of symbols. He hesitated, then turned to the class and asked, "Would anyone like to attempt pronunciation?" One student raised her hand. Ari Vale, a freshman, majoring in anthropology, hazel eyes, black hair, and a faint spiral birthmark under her collarbone, just like the other 6. She hadn't told anyone about the dreams, about the burning elm, or the girl in white who watched her sleep. She stood up, walked to the lectern, and spoke the name. Ecthurial. The lights flickered. The glass on the case shivered. And deep below the university, in the old, sealed tunnels under Hope Street, something turned over in the earth. Dr. Frame dropped to his knees, blood leaking from his ears. He began mumbling fragments of an unknown prayer, not for protection, but for containment. Ari's nose bled. Her eyes rolled back. She began speaking, but the words weren't hers. They were hers and not hers. Older, colder, she said. "It's not a name, it's a key, and the door is not a door." The air in the room grew thick. Students ran, some vomiting, some blind. The clock stopped. Pigeons outside fell dead from the sky. When Ari awoke, she was lying on the floor, alone. The professor was gone. The vellum, missing. The portraits on the walls had changed. Each one now bore a face with no eyes. And carved into the chalkboard over and over, "She returns with fire and soil and breath. She returns with fire and soil and breath." None of the students from that class would ever speak of what happened. 3 would later be institutionalized. 1 went missing in the catacombs under Paris. Another attempted to blind himself in his dorm with a mechanical pencil. And Ari stopped sleeping. She began drawing. Hundreds of pages. Every page featured a tree. And beneath its roots, a girl. Arms outstretched, buried in black. They called her the Root Mother. The first person to notice the pattern was a retired art teacher in Vermont. She ran a modest blog, cataloguing outsider artists and children's drawings. One day she posted a set of images from a public kindergarten in Albany. Crayon sketches with haunting symmetry. Each one featured a tree, but not just any tree. The same gnarled trunk, the same 12 spiraling roots, and beneath it, a figure. Sometimes a girl, sometimes just eyes. The comments exploded. "My son drew the same thing last week in Texas. We found this on our daughter's wall, thought she copied it off the internet. My nephew screams when we show him trees now." Within 2 weeks, the drawing appeared in 16 countries, uploaded by parents, teachers, even prison inmates. Always the same image, always titled, "She Sleeps Beneath." Art forums called it a global childhood archetype. Psychologists blamed TikTok mimicry, but folklorists whispered a different term, tulpa, an idea becoming real through repetition, a being born not of flesh, but of belief. Then came the walkouts. 14 children in 14 different towns, all girls aged 8 to 11, vanished from school grounds on the same day, within the same 10-minute window. Security footage showed them standing up from their desks in perfect unison. They walked calmly, eyes open, mouths moving silently, toward the woods. Police found no signs of struggle, no tracks, no torn clothing, just the drawings, dozens of copies, taped to windows, stuffed into backpacks, burned at the base of trees, and their phones, still streaming. The footage was impossible. The cameras showed another forest, denser, blacker, trees too tall, bark too smooth, no birds, no wind. In one stream, the camera panned up, and the sky blinked. In another, a girl reached out to touch a flower. It screamed and turned to ash. In another, faint whispers under the static. She is rising. We are just the dirt she sheds. View counts skyrocketed. Hundreds of thousands watched. Some laughed. Some panicked. Some claimed the streams caused nightmares just by watching them. And then, one by one, the live streams ended. Not with black screens, not with static, but with the camera tilting, as if being picked up. And a voice, a girl's voice, soft, calm. You see her now, don't you? Then, silence. In the days that followed, 7 more children vanished. Each had drawn the root mother. Each had whispered to trees at recess. Each had sleepwalked the night before, hands coated in soil. Governments issued blanket statements, mass hysteria. Social media platforms took down every related post. But the drawings still came, now in dreams, now on walls, now in blood. And somewhere in the wet dark beneath the old world, she opens her eyes. Dr. Miles Kepler had seen things most historians could only imagine. He'd spent his life tracking the remnants of forgotten sects, secret orders, and pre-colonial cults across the Americas. But nothing prepared him for what he found beneath the St. Audora's church, deep in the forests of Maine. The church had burned down in 1761 under mysterious circumstances. Locals said it was lightning. The few records that survived claimed the flames rose from within the earth. Kepler didn't believe either. What he found instead were foundations that didn't match any colonial blueprint. They were too perfect, geometrically precise in a way 1700s masons couldn't replicate. Stone blocks were fused, not mortared, and in the center of the basement, there was a pit, not dug, but formed, organic, rounded, slick. He descended with a drone. What it showed chilled him more than any scripture. Along the circular pit walls were rows of carvings, smooth and animalistic, not with tools but as if etched with bone or claw. The symbols repeated a pattern, a womb, an eye, a tree, and a mouth, sometimes arranged like constellations, other times like blueprints. And at the bottom of the pit, a sarcophagus, root-wrapped, faintly breathing, made of something not stone, but alive. Meanwhile, 4,000 miles away, in a quiet Polish village, a boy named Kasper, nonverbal, autistic, never spoke a word in his life, began to sing. At 3:04 a.m., his mother awoke to ancient verses echoing from his bedroom. She filmed the event in shock. The boy sat cross-legged, eyes rolled back, humming in a guttural melodic dialect. A linguist later identified the language, Linear B, an extinct Mycenaean script, last used 3,000 years ago. But it wasn't just language. He repeated a prophecy, in perfect meter, when the 13th grove breaks skyward, when blood burns bark and dreams rot fruit, when the root turns mouth and womb, then she shall breathe again. The video leaked. Overnight, it had 5 million views. The church condemned it. Academia denied it. But one sentence caught Kepler's attention. Womb becomes eye, and mouth becomes root. The same phrasing etched on the stone pit's walls. He returned to the foundation site with a translator, a priest, and an underground radar team. The soil below the sarcophagus was shifting, pulsing, listening. And when they tried to dig, every single instrument, shovel, blade, drill, snapped. Not on stone, but on something softer, something watching. Later that night, the priest vanished. The translator was found curled in fetal position, whispering, "She is mother, she is mouth, she is beneath," over and over until her vocal cords gave out. Dr. Kepler checked the footage again. In the last frame before static, The sarcophagus cracked, just enough to leak sap. Not amber, not resin, but something milky, warm, and crying. The word Croatoan has haunted American history for centuries. It was the only clue left behind when 115 settlers of the Roanoke colony vanished in 1590. No bodies, no struggle, no graves. Just that word, carved into a tree. Historians speculated everything from starvation to integration with local tribes. But recently uncovered journals, found sealed in a watertight box beneath a North Carolina chapel, tell a far darker story. They belong to Eleanor Dare, daughter of Governor John White and mother of Virginia Dare, the first English child born in the New World. Her writing began lucid and hopeful. She documented the planting of crops, cooperation with native tribes, the hardships of the coastal environment. But as the pages continued, a shift occurred. She started describing the hum. It begins at dusk, she wrote. A sound from beneath the trees, like bees in a jar or lungs underwater. It grows louder with the moon. Men in the colony began walking in their sleep, drawn to the forest's edge. They'd wake up with their feet blackened and bleeding, as if they'd wandered through fire. One child spoke of a woman in the roots, who whispered his name through the bark. Then the dreams began. All of them dreamed the same dream, of a giant wooden mouth opening in the earth, and beyond it, nurseries, wet, warm, pulsating chambers of sap and bone, holding human shapes in egg-like cradles. It wasn't just a hallucination. Eleanor recorded that the colonists began building altars to her, this root mother, using teeth and bark. They began refusing cooked food, preferring to suck directly from tree trunks, where they claimed to taste milk and memory. One by one, the settlers left their homes, not in a panic, not in fear, but in worship, following the humming into the woods, into the bog, into something older than land. The final pages of Eleanor's journal are blurred with moisture, but one line remains readable. She promised they'd be reborn, fed by her, not in heaven, but inside her. And then, the last sketch. A drawing of her daughter Virginia, with bark for skin and a mouth where her navel should be. In 2023, a group of hikers near Roanoke Island reported strange growths in the marshes. Large wooden nodules shaped like human torsos. One was brought in for study. It split during transport. Inside was a perfectly preserved human lung, still inflating. It didn't match any known DNA, but the lab technician who examined it, just before quitting and disappearing without a trace, left a single sticky note on his workstation. She's not dead. She's gestating. At the edge of a forest that no longer appears on satellite maps, in a county that's since been renamed and rezoned, lies a patch of earth whispered about in psychiatric transcripts and forgotten church annals. Locals once called it the 13th Grove, not because it was the 13th of anything, but because every 12th grove ends with it. It's not on any map, but it finds you. Every story we've followed, from the missing altar boys to the Ravencroft line to Eleanor Dare and the gestating mother, converge here. The soil is rich with iron and teeth. The trees bleed a dark amber sap that smells of placenta and gunpowder. The air is unnaturally quiet. No birds, no insects. Just the low, persistent hum. For centuries, midwives and soil priests have spoken of a convergence. A moment when 13 bloodlines, tainted by knowledge and ritual, return to the grove, whether through body or memory. In 1866, during a fevered sermon recorded in the torn leather diary of Father Silas Greer, a name appears over and over again. When she wakes, the bark shall wear our faces. She shall rise not to rule, but to consume us kindly, and all who fought death shall become her dreaming teeth. Archaeologists from a North Carolina university excavated part of the grove in 1998. They found 13 identical child skeletons, arranged in a ring, hands interlocked. Except they weren't children. They had no skull sutures, no gender markers, and every spine was backward. Their remains were carbon dated to 1589, and again to 2047. In the center of the grove, a sealed iron box was unearthed. Inside, a withered umbilical cord, a vial labeled "First Breath," a note that read, "She will gestate through 13 wombs. The 13th is the world itself." And then, the final item, a black and white photo, clearly taken in the 20th century, of a tree with a human face pressed against its bark, eyes closed in peace. The name scrawled on the back, Virginia Dare. Scholars, cultists, and forbidden archivists agree on one thing. The 13th grove is not a place. It's a phase, a womb phase of the earth, and once complete, the world you know won't end. It will exhale, and all who've disappeared will return. Not in form, but in function. You will see your loved ones again. You just might not recognize their shape, or smell, or the way they whisper your name from inside your own thoughts, because the truth is not that they were taken. The truth is that they were called. And now, so are you.